Hey everyone, how's it going? Matt here, and I just wanted to make a quick video about the new season of The Flash on CW. One of my all-time favorite shows. I love superhero shows, and I've been a fan of the CW stuff since the first season of Arrow, all through its ups and downs, and just wanted to do a quick analysis video of the premiere of season 3. And the difference between a review and an analysis video is basically like a review video is me telling you whether or not I liked it and whether or not I think you should check it out. And an analysis video is actually critiquing the video or critiquing the thing that we're talking about, the subject, and discussing why it worked and why it didn't, as opposed to saying, oh, I didn't like this and I didn't like that. And it's basically as a way to try to work through the narrative of the story that we're talking about and figure out, how to learn from it. And so that's the purpose of this video. I'm not saying that this episode was bad or good necessarily. I'm just going to be pointing out things that didn't work from a narrative point of view as opposed to things that did work from a narrative point of view. Just because I'm a writer and a filmmaker, and that's where my mind goes with these things. So if you did like this episode, more power to you. If you didn't, I can certainly understand why. Just a quick rundown. Basically, at the end of season 3, Barry Allen defeated Zoom. Spoilers. I guess I should preface all this stuff by saying spoilers are coming. But he defeated Zoom, and basically, in doing so, he lost his father. And so now Barry has lost both parents to super speedster supervillains. And even though he finally got the love and affection of Iris West at the end of season 2, he just felt that he wanted his real family back, and so he traveled back through time, stopped the Reverse Flash from killing his mother, and at that point he was just like, I just want my normal life back. I don't want the tragedy and responsibility of being the Flash, and I want my family. And so that was kind of like the cliffhanger that season 2 ended on. Now, at the start of season 3, it's basically been 3 months since that event occurred. And Barry Allen is, back to Central City, and he's working at the police department as a forensics analyst. And he's trying to work up the courage to ask out Iris. And while this is going on, there's a new Flash in town. His name's Kid Flash, and he's, of course, Wally West, which is Iris's little brother. And he's fighting a new super speedster villain called the Rival. And Barry is kind of conflicted about whether or not he should step in to help out, but he kind of believes that, this new Flash has everything under control, and so he leaves it up to him and just wants to live a normal life. And, of course, things have changed for the people in Barry's life. For instance, Joe is an alcoholic and kind of a mess up in this new timeline. He doesn't have that kind of like wise old father air about him anymore. He's just kind of like a burnout cop. And Cisco is a rich tech billionaire, and he's also a ladies' man. He was probably the best part of this episode. Caitlin is a pediatrician, and she's not a scientist of anything. She's like kind of like a kid's doctor now. And that's pretty much where the entire gang is. And so during the course of this episode, Barry kind of discovers that, he needs to be the Flash. He can't just walk away from that responsibility. And it's not fair to everyone else that he use his powers for his own selfish gain, because other people, suffer through tragedy and loss because of his choices in changing the timeline. And so he decides to reset everything, change it back to the way things were, at great personal sacrifice to his own happiness. And of course, in doing so, he kind of messes things up again, but, that's to be expected. So anyway, that was like the gist of the episode, and overall it was a good Flash episode. I thought it was fun. The characters are still there. Rich Ramon, Cisco Ramon was a lot of fun, and I liked the dynamic that the different takes on these characters had. I mean, Iris was still pretty much the same old Iris, but I liked seeing the kind of burnout cop version of her dad, and I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of Wally's kind of journey as this superhero Kid Flash. So I didn't like the fact that they reset everything by the end of the episode. I felt like this could have gone on for at least another like 3 or 4 episodes, kind of like exploring this new timeline and the changes the characters went through and just having a little bit more fun with them than we got just in this episode. And plus the new villain was kind of interesting. He was like the Black Flash and in the black outfit and stuff like that. But there were some major problems with the narrative in this story, and I'm almost afraid that this is suffering from Arrow syndrome, where the first 2 seasons of Arrow were really good, and then the 3rd season just went downhill and just crashed and burned by the time the 4th season finished. So I'm kind of seeing a little bit of evidence of that here, in the sense that the writers don't seem to be taking this stuff too seriously, or as seriously as they need to. And the biggest issue I have with this is the time travel. Obviously, time travel is a big part of the Flash character and part of his power set, but like Legends of Tomorrow, the writers don't seem to be thinking this stuff through very well. If you look at a TV show like 12 Monkeys, where the first season was so tightly plotted out and the time travel stuff was very well done. In the Flash, it's just kind of like anything goes. It's this kind of time travel is this magical plot device where you can just do whatever the heck you want, and there are no repercussions when it comes to it. And it's had this problem since the first season. This isn't a new problem, but it got really glaring last season, and in this episode in particular, it was very much troublesome simply because they start breaking their own rules. And when you do that, it's just kind of like you start to lose your audience. And what I mean by this is that the way the timeline has played out is Barry goes back in time and stops the Reverse Flash from killing his mother. So the first thing that I'm wondering when this happens is what happened to the other Barry Allen that was originally fighting the Reverse Flash when that happened, okay? So you get to this point where if you travel back in time enough, you have multiple copies of yourself. And they kind of addressed this in season 2, where, Zoom and the Flash could both split off into different versions of themselves and have one of them die. And it was cool because, it wasn't the real guy or whatever. So there's like some precedence for this in the show. However, here's the problem. So according to the logic that this show has established, if you look at the very end of this episode in particular, Barry releases the Reverse Flash to go back in time and kill his mother. And the reason he does this is because he wants to reset the timeline. So the Reverse Flash goes back in time and kills his mother at the moment that Barry originally stopped him, okay? So Barry sees him kill his mother, and then the old Reverse Flash disappears, the one that was originally stopped, and Barry disappears, the one that originally stopped the Reverse Flash. Because according to the timeline, that never happened. So they just vanished, okay? So by that logic, okay, if someone changes the timeline and the person who existed in that timeline beforehand just disappears because the timeline was reset, and therefore, to prevent a paradox, they never existed in that place to begin with. If that's the case, then the minute that Barry stopped the Reverse Flash from killing his mother, he should have disappeared. So the big question I had at the beginning of this episode was, why is Barry still the Flash in this new timeline? Because if you look at this from a logical perspective, from the time travel angle, when Barry saved his mother, he should have disappeared, and the young Barry, who was saved in that timeline, grows up to be a normal, average, everyday guy. He doesn't have the need to become a police officer because his father was never falsely imprisoned, so that drive is gone. He could have gone off to become anything. So why aren't there 2 Barrys in this universe? One that's like the Flash, who exists, and one who's the normal Barry, who grew up in this alternate timeline. So if we're to believe that those 2 were somehow merged, why does Barry still have his powers? Like, obviously, throughout the show, you're seeing that he's losing his memories of the alternate timeline, and he's forgetting that he's the Flash, so he's forgetting how to use his powers. But I mean, come on, like, you're gonna be able to use your powers because you still have them. But they didn't make it clear whether or not he was losing his powers as well. So that was very confusing, and it doesn't make any sense from a narrative perspective. On top of all that stuff, there's a bunch of other little things in this episode that bugged me. Like, for instance, the cage that he keeps the Reverse Flash in. So after he defeats the Reverse Flash, he takes him to this warehouse somewhere. I don't know who owns it. It's just abandoned or something. And he puts him in this glass cage, semi-cage. It's got like a door on it, so it's not like a complete cage, but whatever. So this glass cage prevents the Reverse Flash from using his speed. Okay, how did Barry get this cage? Did he build it? Barry's not an engineer. Cisco's the one who builds all the stuff for Barry. Barry's a scientist. He's a chemist. He does forensics. You know, he's not like an engineer. So I'm like, well, okay, how did he build this cage to, you know, kind of contain the Reverse Flash? If I remember correctly, in season 1, they had to have some type of like weird tachyon emitter type Faraday type thing where he was kind of stuck in the middle of this thing and he couldn't get out, as opposed to just a glass cage. Now in season 2, Zoom had a glass cage that he kept Barry in, but it didn't dampen his speed powers. It just kept him from phasing through the glass to escape. So I was like, well, maybe that's the same thing, but it actually wasn't, because, you know, apparently the Reverse Flash couldn't use his Speed Force powers while he was in that cage. So that was a big confusing thing to me. It was just kind of like, oh, we need some way to keep the Reverse Flash contained, so let's just put him in this cage and say he can't use his powers while he's in it. Okay, show. Lazy writing, but I'll suspend my disbelief for that. But a lot of the other stuff, it's kind of hard to suspend my disbelief for. So there were a lot of narrative issues with this episode in particular that just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And, you know, whenever you're dealing with time travel or technology, you have to kind of stick to the rules of the universe that you've laid out beforehand. And the Flash just seems to be kind of throwing that all out the window for convenience sake. And it's just, it bugs me as a fan, because I want to like these shows, and every time I spot one of these things, it just completely takes me out of the narrative, and I start wondering about why they're doing this and why they're doing that. Like, for instance, the whole Kid Flash thing. Now, I get that Wally West in the Prime timeline is Kid Flash because you already have a Flash there, and he's like a younger version of him or something like that. But in this new timeline, the original Flash, the Barry Allen Flash, doesn't exist. So why are they calling him Kid Flash, especially when his sister is the one kind of leading the charge on the reporting of this character? If he wants to be called the Flash, why aren't they just calling him the Flash? Why does it have to be Kid Flash? And I get, like, there were some cute jokes about the name in there, like Wally's like, oh, I'm the Flash, and everyone's like, no, you're Kid Flash. But that in and of itself that's a joke that belongs in the Prime timeline. It doesn't belong in this alternate timeline. So that confused me. Barry still being a police officer, in the forensic department, that confused me. The fact that he was there for 3 months and somehow just discovered that there was a new Flash in town and there was like a new bad guy speedster, that confused me. And also, another big issue, and this has always been an issue with superhero TV shows, is how the heroes fight the villain. Because at the end of the story, the heroes track down the rival, and they come up with a plan. It's like, okay, I'll go straight at him, you flank him. He's got a turn to fight one of us, and whoever he doesn't turn to fight, that's the person who knocks him out. It was a good plan. It makes logical sense. And, once the villain shows up, Wally's like, screw this, I'm going to show you I'm the real Flash, and he goes right at him. And Barry just stands there. He stands there for the entire fight while, Kid Flash is there doing all the work. And then, when Kid Flash finally defeats the guy, he turns around and he's like, yeah, I did it. And the guy stabs him from the back with a blunt object. And then that kind of leads to this whole thing about the choice that Barry made to go back in time and allow his parents to be killed. this could have been handled way better than it was, because first of all, they make it a point to say, oh, speedsters have an advanced healing property. Wally got stabbed through the chest. He's going to be fine. Like, just give him time. But then they're back at Cisco Laboratories, and they're like, oh, well, his healing factor is not kicking in. Why is it not kicking in? I don't know. Nobody ever says why. They had that problem with Wells from Earth 2's daughter in the previous season, and they figured out a way to fix that. So Barry could have just used that solution to help heal Wally, but he chooses to let his family die instead to his arch nemesis. Now, there are a few other factors that go into this decision, the fact that he's losing his memory and stuff like that, but if you think about the reason why he did this all to begin with, which was to preserve the life of his mother and father and have a normal life, that he was getting what he wanted. So why did he make that decision, especially after the fact that nobody really died? There was no real consequence to what he was doing. They could have healed Wally. Wally wasn't dead. Joe was all messed up, but after he discovered that his son was the Flash, he might have turned over a new leaf or something like that. Cisco was way better off in this new timeline, and Caitlin seemed happy. I mean, whatever happened to Ronnie? Is Ronnie still alive in this timeline? Is she happily married? Like, everyone seemed better off in this timeline, but by the end, because Wally got injured, Barry's like, oh no, I got to go back and make sure my mom dies. That kind of logic just doesn't make sense to me. Now, if Iris and Wally and Joe and everyone that Barry cared about got really messed up or died at the end of this episode, I can understand that decision, because Barry's choices affected a lot of other people adversely, and he wanted to go back and fix that, okay? But the way it stands now, this was just a lazy reset of the storyline that they set up at the end of season 2. And they've done this, they did this at the end of season 1 and beginning of season 2 as well, where you had like that big, kind of like time anomaly that opens up, threatens to destroy all of creation, and then it's forgotten about by the end of, episode 1 of season 2. So, there's all this stuff that didn't really work from a narrative perspective in Flashpoint. That's another thing. Why name it Flashpoint other than the fact that they're doing a callback to the comics? I mean, I understand that Reverse Flash probably had a lot of time sitting in that cell with no toilet to think about things, but if that's the best he can come up with for this new timeline, he needs some work. I kind of find it funny that Flash is carrying over the Arrow tradition of keeping people locked up in a tiny cage with no toiletries or anything like that. Although Flash has been doing that since the beginning when they put the supervillains in those little pods. It's like there's no bathroom in there. Where do they go to the bathroom? Does anyone go to the bathroom in this universe? It'd just be nice to have like a bucket in the corner or something like that, and you can explain it away, but never happens. Anyway, it was a fun episode. All Flash episodes are usually pretty fun if you don't think about them too much. But from a narrative perspective, the time traveling and the emotional decisions, the decision making of the hero in particular, just don't jive with me. And I'm worried because the exact same thing has been happening to Arrow since season 2. So yeah, that's pretty much my take on it. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Are you excited about this new season? Where do you see it going? And what did you think about this episode in particular, especially about them breaking their own rules of time travel? Before I end this, I just want to say real quick that there has been a precedent of the time remnant thing in the Flash in season 2, where they explain how the Reverse Flash was still alive after dying. So the question becomes, how does the time remnant thing work? And the whole idea was that if there's ever a version of the speedster in the Speed Force, when the timeline changes, that person is preserved because the Speed Force acts as kind of like a bomb shelter. So the Speed Force preserves them from the time changing. But neither Barry nor the Reverse Flash were in the Speed Force when the timeline shifted. So they shouldn't have existed. If anything, another version of them should have come out of the Speed Force and been like, oh wait, this is a different timeline. How did this happen? And then like they'd have to figure out, what Barry did and stuff like that. That would have made sense. This didn't make any sense. And that brings up another question: is Eddie Thrawn still alive in this new timeline? Because that's another guy that Barry's basically sacrificing at the end of the show. Did Eddie, was he cool? Like, is Eobard even a villain in this timeline? There's just so many questions that these time travel things bring up, and if you're not really specific about how this stuff works and the ramifications it has, you run into all these like big problems. So, yeah, what do you guys think about this? Are you looking forward to the new season? What are your predictions? Please let me know, and I will see you all later.